Hi everyone, Redneck Computer Geek here. So, I've always had the statement, cash is king, but trades can happen. And that is exactly what this is. This was a trade deal. I showed up to a friend's house. He had ended up with this. He needed some other parts. Didn't have any money. We made a trade agreement. I traded him about $150 worth of parts. He valued this at about $100 in a non-running state. I'd say it's a pretty equal deal. I have not done anything to this other than thrown it in my truck. I took off the pulley off the bottom to make it easier to work with and thrown it on this engine stand. Because I want to go through my initial looking at this motor with you, so I can point out the things that I see in order to determine a little bit about this motor before we even bother to try to start it. Because you can figure out a lot about where to proceed before you ever attempt to go and fire up a motor. So let's take a quick look at this and walk around with the camera and talk about a few things. So as you can see right here, there's supposed to be an inlet right there, and it's missing and it's loose on this side, as you can hear. And the other thing you can see, if I line that up, is that bracket is massively bent. And the other thing that you can see from this is that there is a rust line coming down across here. And you can see the same line right there. So that would mount like that when it's on a machine. So either this was impacted at some point, the machine itself was impacted, and that would tell us that over on this side we need to make sure that these bolts aren't snapped out of the motor. The other thing that tells us is that there's a lot more oily stuff going on this side that managed to keep that side from rusting up as bad as this side. So we want to keep an eye on that side and see if there's something going on. Could be that there was a blown head gasket, could be that there was a leak in the engine on this side, something along those lines. The other thing about this that I'll point out right now, if you can see it, is this is gravel. And gravel obviously can't end up in there without this being tipped over. And you can see that this is all grungy and gravel covered, whereas this one is nice and cleanish. And you can see over in here, this entire side is all icky, whereas this side is just oily grunge. So, yeah, and you can see down across here. So I'm going to bet at some point this was stored sitting on its side. And the reason why that's important to note when you see this is that's your starter. And if your starter ends up in a mud puddle, if it ends up in any kind of water or anything from sitting on the side of the motor, then that potentially can be frozen, and we need to watch out for that the first time we try it, that might be frozen up from being in water. Anytime you go to store one of these motors, I highly recommend it being worth putting it on cinder blocks. It's like $2 or $3 for a couple of cinder blocks, and you can set it on there even with the pulley on the bottom most of the time, and it's up high enough that it's not going to end up sinking into the ground and into a mud puddle. So I have not even bothered to try and turn this over, so we're going to do it right now live. Ready? There's a compression. Made it past that one. There's the other compression. And made it past that one. So that first compression stroke that you could hear was a little bit harder to turn. So if we're coming around, we're going to have that stroke there. Yep. And then the next one, which right there. So what that tells us is that one side, the valves are a little bit out of adjustment more than the other side. It doesn't feel like the valves are out of adjustment enough that it won't run, but if we have some issues with cranking it over, that gives us the heads up we probably should check the valves and make sure those are dialed in correctly. Now, the other thing that I always do is double check the back. Make sure that there's no cracks, there's no massive amount of oil seepage or anything, stuff like that. Now, as I come around, we're going to talk about why it is this entire time you guys should be really glad you do not have smell-o-vision. Can you see that grunge right in there? It's literally across all of that. If you had smell-o-vision right now, you would know why we're still outside. This thing stinks. I don't know what it has for rat's nests in it or whatever, or what died, or what swamp thing made a home in it, but it stinks. The other thing is we've got a spark plug that snapped off, but I don't know if you can see in there, but that whole thing is filled with mouse nest and everything. So we're going to pull all of this top off, and we're going to pull this tin off, and then go from there. And one last thing that I always recommend, especially if there's a potential it's been stored outside for an extended period of time, might have had waterlogging issues or anything. See how this is corroded? You can see the corrosion starting on the aluminum here. That means that most likely the side of the carburetor is probably corroded also. So before you try to start anything, you want to come down and you want to find where your throttle is, and you want to monkey with it. See if it actually moves anything. See if it actually does anything. See if it's actually connected to anything. See, that's moving up and down. So if I rotate that, I can see that the spring is moving. I can see that the governor is moving. I can see that the rod going up to the carburetor is moving freely. I can hear it all playing. So always check for corrosion on a motor that's been sitting. It looks as if this one hopefully got caught in time. So we're going to take this off, we're going to take this off, and we're going to see what kind of mouse nest hell we're in for. Yeah, see that one there? That's all rotted out. That's been in there a while. Well, that's not the best way to start. And I'm sure you guys want to know whether it's even got any oil. And the answer, if you can see it, is yes, it does. And it actually looks rather fresh. There we go. Smells okay too, so at least they didn't decide to go and fill it up with some automatic transmission fluid. I've seen that a few times. So let's position you guys. I think this side's going to be the worst of it. And let's see what's under here. Oh, I was wrong. So, when you end up with a mouse nest like this, mice work underneath the principle of don't take a crap in a dump wherever it is that they sleep. But it's usually within about 6 inches to a foot away from wherever their nest is. So if it's not here, then the next spot would be right here. Let me go grab a flashlight and I'll show you. Alright, so we'll grab a flashlight here. Oh yeah. All kinds of mouse poop. Alright. Well, let's see if we can clean that out and blow it out a bit. Oh yeah. I should probably have gloves on, because this is pretty rank. But, whatever. We did the good thing and we taped that off so we won't put anything down in there. For anybody new to these motors right here, this is your choke lever right here. And if you look down through there, you can see the choke actually moving around in order to check that while you've got this off. The other thing you want to do while you're in here right now is you want to be checking these cables. And I'll show you the spark plug cable on this side right now. As you can see, it got chewed into, but it didn't make it into the core. So we should be able to liquid tape that one and save it. But we'll find out. We're going to spark test both of them. And that, dear viewers, is why it is we did this outside. Because it currently looks as if a mouse turd bomb went off in front of my garage now. So now we can take the motor and we can haul it inside the garage where we usually work, and I can get better lighting for you and go from there. Normally I jump right to doing the spark plug and starter test right now, but I wanted to go and point this out. So this is what the spark plug from the cylinder it was sitting over towards the side of looked like. See how that's filled with oil? That's because, well, it was sitting tipped sideways like that, all of the oil filled into that cylinder. So I'm going to bet when we try and crank this over without the spark plug that we're going to see a bunch of oil shoot out of that side. This was the broken off spark plug that we saw earlier, and as you can see, that is beyond rusted. So on this one over here, on this plug, I've got to clean this out and clean it up. Now there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. A lot of guys will take a drill bit and they'll just run a drill bit down in and out on it. While holding it with a pair of pliers. You can sandpaper it, you can do a bunch of other stuff. But the thing that I'll point out right now is that if I was ever going to sell this to a customer, this would get replaced. Between the mouse chewings and this, once they get rusted to this point, they will continue to keep re-rusting out and fouling out. So this, if it's going to be up for sale to a customer, has got to be replaced. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. While we're on that topic, a lot of you ask me to fill in my video description with parts and stuff. So that's what I'll do on this video. I'll post up a link for the carburetor for this, for the coils for this, the fuel pump for this. And I'll post a link for this. It's the $45 booster pack that I've been using all winter for different projects. And I'm planning on buying probably another 2 of these for racing season, because they'll crank over a large twin without any issue, even upwards of a 27 horsepower Kohler without flinching. Alright, so we've got our booster pack, and these booster packs have voltage safety features and stuff in them, but on the back of them, they've got a push button in order to override it. So what we're going to do is we're going to hook up our positive to the lug on the side of the starter. We're going to hold down that button on the back of this. And the light's going to turn green, which means voltage on, and we're going to see what happens. I'm going to go with that starter is frozen. Yep, I cannot move it with my fingers. I probably should have tried that earlier. Okay, let's pull that starter off and let's throw it on the bench. If you're into those memes of how engineers deliberately screw stuff up in order to make life harder for mechanics, these starters, these are one of them. So as you can see, this starter is frozen. So what I've had to do is take this and I've had to turn it so that this is facing a little bit past 90 degrees to the motor. 90 degrees would be right about here. It's about here. That way you can take your really long T40 Torx and you can take the end of a hex there and you can break that nut, well, bolt, I'm sorry, free in behind. There. And that is how you say to hell with the engineer. So now we just got to get this nice easy one out of here, and then we'll go bench test this starter. Got the starter out, and while we're right here, I wanted to point out a couple of things. So this wire, this black one right here, which comes down in behind the starter, and there's a splice here where the two come together. This is your kill wire for the coil for the motor. If you ground this to the block, it can't run. It kills all the spark. This gray wire runs to the bottom of the carburetor and has to have power in order to run the solenoid in the bottom of the carburetor. Now, if you're building a racing machine, 99.9% of the time, you're going to take that solenoid out and you're going to cut off the tip and put it back in. If you're building a machine and the customer or whoever you're building it for wants the safeties still left, this has to have power in order to test fire it when you're on a test bench like this. Okay? So, we got that. We got more mouse poop. Got more mouse poop. And we're going to go put this on the bench. Alright. Will it come back to life? Starter Edition 101. So, if I get a pair of really good channel locks, like these ones with the push button shift in them, see that? How it locks in? I can get on here, and I can turn this thing while I've got it in a bench vise. Now, what I'm listening for when I do this is that it turns and doesn't make crunchy Rice Krispies getting squished noises, because that would tell me the battery was blown and that this is a lost cause. So that sounds good. The other thing I'll point out right now is checking to make sure the starter gear spins up and down nicely. I can tell that this starter was either old on the machine or it was having valve problems because the teeth are chewed off to one side. And usually what happens when you end up with this side being fine and this side being chewed off is that it's catching on a certain side of the engine that's eating it. I don't know why twins tend to do this. For some reason, singles eat all of the keys. Twins, on the other hand, usually end up wearing on one side more than the other. But that is promising. So we're going to deliberately just rotate it over a couple of times. And it's already getting easier and easier to rotate, which tells me that the story that this motor was running when it was pulled is probably a true story. Alright, so we should be able to turn that by hand, and we can't. So at this point, we're going to take the next step, and we're going to undo the two bolts that go all the way through. we're only going to undo them about 1/8 of an inch. And the reason being is we want to pop this top enough that we can spray some PB Blaster down in here or whatever your choice is. And at this point, you're committed, especially when it's rusted like this one, that you may or may not snap that off and this whole thing is screwed. Now, most of them are going to be 5/16. I have found several over the years now that are 8s, depending on how Chinesium they were built. So the outside one usually always comes loose. It's the inside one that usually gets all of the mouse poop on it and the mouse piss. And that's the one that usually is rusted to the point of screwed. So here we go. Oh, not nice noise. More not nice noise. But it's coming loose. And that just got really, really tight right there. So we're going to just call it good and see if we can pop it open. So I'll pan you guys over here so you can see. Right like that. See, that's popped open now. So now I can flood that with PB Blaster. And we'll see if we can get it to turn over. Now you got to be careful not to pop this side or else you'll get your brushes loose. And once you get your brushes loose, that's a whole new ball game of hell. So I'll grab some PB Blaster, spray it in there, see if it'll turn over. And you want to undo this and tip it to the side. And also spray it in so that it drains down through. And right now while you're doing this, you want to be listening to make sure you don't hear a crunch and then a grinding noise. If you hear a crunch and then a grinding noise, probably your brush just came out and ended up turning sideways, or you chipped off the end of the brush, and at that point, you're screwed. You got to tear the whole thing apart and hopefully be able to swap some brushes in from another one. So there we go. That feels a lot looser. Oh, there we go. There, I can actually turn the whole thing now. Like so. Okay. So at this point, we're going to tighten these back up. And you're just doing these hand tight. This is not... I'm a firm believer in using power tools to make life easier. This is not a power tools type scenario. This is a take your time and be careful and do it right scenario. So we're going to flip that up around so we can see this. Help if I use the correct side. Help if I had to go in the right direction. Probably should edit that out, but I'm not going to because I'm lazy today. There we go. There. So we'll flip it back. And at this point, hopefully we can turn it. Now, it's going to be slightly tighter because you're compressing in on it, but you want to make sure the bearings actually still settled. And they did. So at this point, we should be able to smack it with some electricity and go from there. So we'll hold down our safety disabling switch here. Positive on the side lug, negative on the top. I'd call that game on. Alright, spin over and check for spark. Take one. Okay. Over and check spark. Take two. Definitely got spark on both. Alright, so at this point, I would say our best bet is put some spark plugs in and give it a little bit of gas and see if it'll decide to go off. Alright, so our choke goes like this. So we're going to give it a squirt of gas, hold the choke, and then hit it with the booster pack and see if it'll fire. So this is my little gas contraption I came up with for this year. It's a basketball pump tip, just hot glued into the top of a syrup bottle. So there we go. Now, let's set this on. And hold that choke over and go for it. Well, that sounded promising, didn't it? You guys want to hear it one more time? Try one more, just for the hell of it. Booster just timed out. That's the one problem with these, which is why it is I recommend buying the straight cables. But you're going to fry the straight cables. They're about $10 a cable, so it's worth it to fry them. But you get the idea. So let's try and hear it one more. Well, I'd say that's worth monkeying with. We talked about the solenoid earlier in the video. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to pull and we're going to disable it. So we're going to undo the bolt here. And we're going to undo this bolt here. Now, what we're going to do is let it hang just like that. Unplug this. Now, if you wanted to go and trigger this solenoid, you'd put positive to this and use that as your ground. And this is a 1/2 inch, which I already undid. Come on. Long threaded little bugger. So here we are. That right there is your solenoid tip. So this, when you hit it with positive, goes down. And when you let off, goes up in order to close off all your gas. And what usually happens when these sit is this stops moving and it ends up stuck in the off position. So just so we don't have to deal with it anymore, because this motor is destined for other projects and not a customer, we're going to take that, throw it in a vise, and slice it right off, even with the thread line right there. And there we are. Installation is the opposite of removal. Now, one of the number one questions that I get asked is, man, that one just does not want to play fair. There it goes. One of the number one questions that I get asked on a regular basis is, if you disable these, should you remove this? And my answer has always been either remove it or zip tie it off to the side somewhere where it won't get in the way. And the reason being is because these valves, the solenoids, can actually get stuck partway in between, and they will overheat, and this wire here will actually catch fire. So I recommend getting them the heck out of there, or at least zip tying it off to the side where it's never going to bother anything. So slowly bring this up and around so you don't lose your throttle spring and your governor, and set one side halfway, set the other side, and then drive them home. And on these Briggs & Stratton twins, there's actually a hole that's right in here that you can zip tie that right to easily. Alright, so put a little bit of gas in there, and we'll pour off the rest up in here. The black wire to the side of the motor kills it. Oh, there we go. I would say that that should do pretty good. And we'll call that a win.